Hi guys, I'm Emma and today I'm going to be discussing the course concept, belonging. Have you ever had an inkling that you were not welcomed by people or a place? Have you ever felt judgment that you were made to question your cultural background because in someone's eyes you didn't look a certain way or act a certain way? Agents of socialization such as family, culture and religion create a sense of belonging for all of us individuals. We were all brought up in a different manner. We were encouraged to incorporate different beliefs into our lives and live by specific cultural traditions. We all have different belongings, so shouldn't we be embracing such diversity in our world? But due to things like nasty stereotypes and outdated social norms, every so often we are made to question our sense of belonging. Is this where I'm meant to be? Do I belong to this group or that group? Can I interact with people who do not have the same beliefs as myself? Essentially, belonging defines the way we live our lives, referring to how we dress, our values, our morals, and most importantly, our culture. Culture is passed down through generations. While cultural practices and beliefs change and evolve, many of the basic aspects remain the same. Yes, we may dress differently to how our grandparents dress. It's probably likely that we still incorporate certain elements into our daily lives. These cultural elements strongly reflect who we are and further influence our belonging in society. For some people, the idea that everyone has culture could be new. This is particularly true for people who are a part of mainstream society. In this case, trying to identify your culture may be challenging at first because it's so natural and normal that it's virtually invisible to us. But the concept of belonging relates to everyone in society as it creates our identities and as individuals and guides us through our busy lives. Although everyone has a belonging, First Australians have a belonging that represents diversity as it is unique and distinct from mainstream society. Indigenous people's belonging is constructed around 5 key concepts: land, family, law, ceremony and language. These concepts are the defiance of Indigenous culture and are significant to their way of life. It can be described that Indigenous people belong to the land as they are referred to as the traditional custodians and each have a specific area they belong to culturally. The concept of language allows Indigenous people to develop their belonging through interaction and connection with family, community members and the land. It allows them to deepen their understanding and connection to their surroundings just like us. We use English to engage in society, the people around us, and to deepen our knowledge. The tragedy of historic events represents the notion that the concept of belonging and identity in Indigenous culture was completely disregarded in the past. Appalling events such as the European settlement and the stolen generation represent a time when mainstream society went, you know what, they don't deserve to belong or identify as their own race. And look where that got us. It resulted in an apology and a gap dividing Australia. Artwork by Eric Lebecki represents the tragedy and hardship of the stolen generation in the 1900s. Lebecki's artwork demonstrates the complete disregard of human rights and the dignity of Indigenous culture. Between 1910 and 1970, the Australian government took over 100,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children away from their families, as the government did not believe or approve the future of First Australians. The purpose of the stolen generation was based on the assumption that white men were more superior and essentially let Indigenous generations die out. The children taken were taught to reject their Indigenous heritage and were forced to adopt white culture. Throughout the stolen generation, the Australian government and church missions destroyed First Australians' sense of belonging and attempted to create a new one for them. The children were taken from everything they knew: their families, communities, language and culture. They were force-fed a culture that they did not belong to and had no significant connection to. Some would say these victims were completely lost. They had no idea about who they were, where they came from, but they knew that this wasn't their calling. Child removal policies failed its aim of improving the lives of Indigenous Australians by absorbing them into white society. This was primarily because white society refused to accept Indigenous people as equals, regardless of their efforts to live like white people. You may be sitting there with a question floating around your head like, why does the stolen generation still matter today? Or what has this got to do with the concept of belonging? The stolen generation is significantly important today as the forcible removal of Indigenous children from their families and communities caused a heavy impact that is still suffered by many today. The children who were subjected to this were made to feel ashamed of their Indigenous heritage and have struggled to connect and engage with it since. The stolen generation severely disrupted Indigenous oral culture, and consequently much cultural knowledge has been lost due to several generations being removed from their communities. Because so much knowledge has been lost, the victims of this historic event are struggling to find out where they came from and where they belong. This quote by Malcolm Fraser states, "We are seeing healing among the stolen generations and initiatives which are enabling Indigenous people to make their distinctive contribution to our national life." This quote represents the notion that Indigenous people are creating their own identity and belonging through personal beliefs, religion, and values. As teachers, it is our duty to help students find their individual belonging, as a sense of belonging will influence their learning journey and the rest of their life. I aim to be a teacher that takes into account all students' backgrounds and acknowledges all of their belongings and identities. These positive relationships with all students will benefit their learning as they will engage in new contexts and feel as though they belong in the classroom. Thank you.